Hello, record wranglers. In the previous video, I showed you how to enable regulatory records, which are disabled by default. But what are the regulatory records and why wouldn't they be enabled to begin with? That's what we're going to learn in this video. But the most important thing, I'll show you the biggest issue with labeling regulatory records at the end of this video. There are three types of retention labels in M365. Retention labels, let's call it regular retention, record labels, and regulatory record labels. And this is the one we are discussing now. A regulatory record label, once applied to an item, cannot be changed, overridden, nor it can be removed. And this immutability ensures compliance with regulatory requirements. I'm going to demonstrate it to you. Here, a regulatory record label was applied to an item. I made a mistake, but now I cannot do anything with it. And I'm a SharePoint site admin. When the retention period of a regulatory record ends, it follows the actions defined by the label, for example, deletion. You cannot apply a new label to extend or change this action. As you could see, regulatory record labels are tamper-proof. So, if the desired outcome is compliance, what's wrong with having a regulatory records label option enabled by default? One reason they are not enabled because they are designed for organizations with strict compliance requirements. But even those organizations need to be very careful about enabling this option. Why? Because there actually could be quite a few problems with the usage of regulatory record labels. In some cases, the inflexible nature becomes an issue, which ironically could lead to potential non-compliance. So here it is. The immutable nature of regulatory records in M365 is both a feature and a challenge. Here's the first common concern: mislabeling the item. Imagine that you made a mistake when applying a regulatory record label. You cannot reverse that. There's no button to press to undo that action. Incompetent information management workers can create a non-compliance quagmire very quickly. Lack of bulletproof file plan and solid documentation can also contribute to potential issues. And even if you have top-notch staff, humans do make mistakes. Poor communication between departments can also lead to inconsistent application of regulatory labels. Mergers, acquisitions, restructuring, or any other changes in organizational structure can disrupt information management processes and lead to inconsistent application of regulatory labels. Enabling regulatory record labels will require additional training programs and governance. So, now that you know, would you dare to use regulatory record labels, especially in the organization that doesn't have a solid file plan or solid training? Managing immutable records requires a high level of governance, as any mistake in the labeling can pose serious issues. How can these mistakes happen? Well, what if the users are not trained and informed? Do you have good naming conventions for your labels? Are those naming conventions respected? Take a look at this demo site. This might not be the best example, as these labels are very sloppy. However, it's enough to demonstrate my point. So here is a list of labels that were published to the site. I have just a few, but normally there would be many more labels in a real-life scenario. As you see, I do have one label with the name that suggests it is a regulatory record, but others are not clearly marked. Granted, these labels are a total mess for exaggeration. Now, the user would see the alert when applying a regulatory record label, but we all know that some users don't bother reading them. So many people just click through all dialog boxes. There is even an option to create administrative message to the users when you are creating a label. Assuring that overworked personnel will read everything might not be entirely possible. Even when the users are aware that they are applying regulatory record label, what if they apply the incorrect one and then you're stuck with it? Even though it might keep a record that needs to be destroyed earlier, exposing organization to potential compliance risks. And without regular audits and reviews, mislabeling and non-compliance issues can go unnoticed for long periods. Okay, what if your organization did invest in training and the only personnel who can apply regulatory record labels are few specially trained record managers? That is definitely a step in the right direction, but there is one but. M365 has a specific set of security permissions in Microsoft Purview, formerly Compliance Center. In order to create and publish labels to the workloads, such as SharePoint, users need to be assigned specific elevated privileges. Access to Microsoft Purview is guarded for this and other reasons. The issue is that all published labels can be applied by any SharePoint site user. That's right, anybody who is collaborating on the documents can apply regulatory record label, even if it's not a record manager. For the solutions that leverage in-place record management, it is particularly concerning. Why? Because everybody is there. I have another video coming up that deals with the in-place record management, and that video demonstrates all implications of in-place record management. Subscribe to get notified. Getting back to manual labeling, I'm going to remind everybody that you cannot apply regulatory record labels automatically. It is always a manual action, and for the good reason. So, to me, the biggest problem remains: anybody can declare a regulatory record. Given the immutable nature of these labels, having more precise permission settings could help prevent accidental or unauthorized label applications, which could reduce the risk of compliance issues and operational headaches. Let's take a look at security aspect. Security breaches or unauthorized access to the records can result in tampering. An insider and malicious intent can cause significant damage by labeling items incorrectly. This malicious activity may go unnoticed, and if discovered, the insider could just try claiming it was an error. Changes in regulatory requirements, although rare, do happen. Imagine if you have a few thousand documents that you were keeping for 7 years, but new regulation requires them to be kept for 10 years. You can definitely increase your retention period for the record that is marked with the regulatory record label. But if the new regulation changes the retention requirement to a shorter period, for instance from 7 years to 5 years, there is no way to shorten the retention period of the record that's been already labeled. So there is a reason why Microsoft decided not to enable regulatory record labels by default. Perhaps you can consider building a custom solution that provides a role-based access control to restrict who can apply regulatory record labels. While I do hope that Microsoft addresses this issue, I'm not holding my breath. I'm currently building my own framework that will provide better control over regulatory record labels in M365. Stay tuned and subscribe for more videos.